Did you know that Lilo and Stitch had a PlayStation 2 exclusive prequel? And it's actually kind of interesting. Welcome to Disney Stitch Experiment 626. Developed by High Voltage Software and published by Sony, this released in June 2002 in America, just 2 days before the release of the film. It would eventually see a release in Europe in late 2002 and Japan in March of 2003. You may recognise the name of High Voltage Software as they were the masterminds behind the original LEGO Racers. They would also go on to develop many different licensed tie-in games, including for Ben 10, Family Guy, and even Zombieland. So to summarise, Disney's Stitch Experiment 626 is a platformer, third-person shooter, and an action-adventure kind of all merged into one. The two primary things you'll be doing are platforming and shooting, and of course, collecting items. So the story begins with Stitch being known as a fugitive. He's out and about with Jumba, looking out to collect DNA. The DNA that you collect allows Jumba to create his 700 series of experiments, and along the way you'll face off against the evil Dr. Habit Rail, who's a pretty threatening looking dude. You'll face up against Experiment 621 because he feels inferior to you, and at the end of the game you'll face Gantu, who, by the way, for some reason apparently isn't in the new Lilo and Stitch live-action remake because he wouldn't work. Very strange. Anyway, okay, so now that we've laid out the story, let's get into the controls. So to move Stitch around, you can either use the D-pad or the left analog stick, but the issue is the camera is kind of tied to Stitch, so when you turn Stitch left or right, the camera moves with that same analog stick. So unfortunately that means it doesn't really follow the modernish platformer standards of moving with one analog stick, looking around with the other one. Which is weird because other platformers that had come out before and around the same time were already doing this, and honestly it makes for quite a frustrating experience. Anyway, to jump you press the X button, and Stitch does have a double jump, so you just tap the same button again. Stitch can hold up to 4 ray guns in his arms, and to fire these you just hold the square button. There should be an auto-lock system in the game. It kind of works sometimes, but not all the time. And when Stitch does lock onto an enemy, it turns into strafe controls of just sliding left or right with the analog stick. You can pick up certain enemies and objects with the circle button and throw with that same button. There are a few special weapons in the game, such as a freeze ray, and you fire that with the triangle button. Eventually you'll gain other abilities such as being able to have speed bursts and do ball slams into enemies, which you do with L1. And if you get a jetpack or a grapple, you use this with R1. They're not terrible controls, but the camera really lets the entire thing down, because the game teases you and lets you move the camera around with the right analog stick, but the minute you move, it just snaps straight back onto Stitch. You can't actually just look around whilst you walk. Don't get me wrong, I've played platformers with more awkward camera controls than this, but for a game that came out in 2002 on the PS2, there could have been a lot more done here. So in this game there are 2 main types of collectibles. There are DNA samples, you get them in blue and you get them in red. The blue samples are worth just 1, and the red samples, which are usually harder to find, are worth 5. You have to collect a certain number of these to progress through the game into new worlds and levels, so it's very important that you are picking up as many of these as you can. Some are harder to find than others. For example, at checkpoints the game will just give you one, as well as at the end of the level or when you beat a boss. But you have to go looking around and destroying a lot of things to find all the hidden bits of DNA, so that can be quite time consuming. As well as DNA samples, there are film reels hidden throughout the levels, usually about 7 of them, and you can use these to buy various clips from the Lilo and Stitch film. So if you were one of the few people that bought this the 2 days before the film came out in America, you could have seen many different parts of the film just by playing this game. As well as these collectibles, there are also a few other things that Stitch can pick up throughout his adventure. These include food that will heal Stitch from when he takes damage. There's a lightning bolt you can pick up that gives you temporary invincibility. The game usually gives you one of these when you enter an area that has quite a lot of enemies that are going to spawn. It's always a good warning sign. And as well as these, Stitch only starts the level with 1 blaster, and obviously he can hold up to 4, so as you progress throughout each level you will find more blasters, which increases your fire rate. So how is it controlling Stitch? Well, it's okay. In the larger, more open areas, moving Stitch around is great, there's no problems, but when it comes to tighter platforming sections, because of how fiddly the camera can be, it can be really frustrating trying to see where you're going. If you know you have to make a difficult jump, half the time you're going to have to stop, use the right analog stick to try and look around, because if you try and move Stitch he might fall, and then you just kind of have to jump blindly to the right or left wherever it is you're going, and hope that you land on the platform you've aimed for. This game does have a couple of issues, but the biggest crack that really ruins this game for me is definitely the janky camera. The camera problems continue when you get into combat as well. As I mentioned previously, it should just auto-lock onto enemies and Stitch can strafe around, but the problem is when enemies spawn around you, it doesn't auto-lock onto the next enemy, and it's very hard to just turn Stitch around half the time. Especially in situations where there's more than like 2 enemies, because Stitch loses health very quickly. Thankfully, if you do lose all your health in combat or you make a mistake during the difficult platforming, then the game is very generous with checkpoints, so it's not hard to get back to where you were before. Throughout each level there are also these red floating circles that are just lines of dialogue from Jumba or other characters, and part of me thinks the developers knew this game was kind of awkward to control because the amount of hand holding that Jumba does for you in these games is quite impressive. At various points when you have to use the grappling hook, he constantly reminds you to let go of the grapple hook earlier so that you fly further, and if you've missed a section where Stitch can climb on the wall, he will remind you that you can wall climb as well. This game also features a few boss fights with the aforementioned Dr. Habit Rail, Experiment 621 and Gantu. These boss fights aren't particularly hard, but can sometimes be frustrating, again just down to the movement and the camera that the game provides you with. Once you get used to the jankiness though, they're quite easy to get through. So in terms of design, how does this game hold up? Well, you can see that High Voltage Software actually cared quite a lot about the IP. The world design is pretty good, each planet feels quite hostile and different as you visit them. There's a pretty decent atmosphere that's been created here. Stitch himself looks pretty good considering this is a 2002 game. There are some pretty funny looking CG cutscenes, but outside of this, the game actually looks pretty nice. The level designs themselves in terms of the platforming challenges are good, they just don't really work with the controls that the game provides you. If the game had a decent functioning camera and movement system, these levels would be absolutely fine. But purely down to the awkward controls, these levels can be quite a slog to get through. In terms of audio, this game is very good. It's got full voice acting, and features the same voice actors who play these characters in the film, such as Chris Sanders as Stitch, Kevin Michael Richardson as Gantu, the late David Ogden Stiers as Jumba, and Zoe Caldwell as the Councilwoman. As well as good voice lines and decent writing, this game also has a pretty good soundtrack. Obviously it doesn't have the Hawaii vibe of the film because this is long beforehand. It features quite a futuristic upbeat soundtrack to mix in with each planet that you go to, and it works pretty well. And the menu music rocks pretty hard. In terms of the design choices for visuals and audio that High Voltage Software made, it's pretty good going, and it's such a shame that a very promising tie-in game has been let down by such a terrible camera, because otherwise this would be a pretty nice companion piece to the film. Experiment 626 also has a bunch of unused assets, such as this very weird fan-looking thing, which is in the codes described as OJ shot. Now, it appears that this would have shot you at a certain distance, but when you put it into the game, it can't be interacted with, and the animation does not play unless you give it a different behaviour. There are also a variety of other random things, including turrets, birds, fish, whatever the hell this thing is. In the code, this is just known as Lunk, L-U-N-C, and it appears that it would have been one of these platforms you could stand on, and if you were on it for too long, then it would have snapped up and attacked you. But I just have to say it's absolutely terrifying to look at. But now the question that remains is, what was the response to Experiment 626? On Metacritic, Stitch Experiment 626 holds a fairly okay 59 out of 100. Now obviously a lot of critics cited the terrible camera as 99% of the problems with this game, while some just had general issues with the game's easiness. In terms of user score, it holds a fairly respectable 6.8 out of 10, with a lot of people looking back fairly fondly on this game from their childhoods. In terms of sales, Stitch Experiment 626 sold fairly well, with 300,000 copies sold. This is as per VG charts. So that takes us to the end of our look at Stitch Experiment 626 for the PS2. I really wanted to like this game, and I really tried to, but it's just let down by some really awkward camera controls. You can see that a lot of love and care went into crafting the worlds in which Stitch visits. It's just a shame that that love and care wasn't poured into testing the controls. So what do you guys think of this game? Have you played it? Did you like it? Please let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap that bell for notifications. And I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.